Welcome to This Explainer. We're jumping right into something completely mind-bending today, so get ready. When we think about ancient history, we usually picture this very neat, highly organized timeline, right? We imagine these grand, sprawling empires and long, pristine lineages of rulers meticulously numbered from 1 all the way to 100. But have you ever stopped to wonder what happens before the beginning? Like, what exactly is going on just before the very first official page of recorded history is even written? Well, today, we're exploring an incredibly obscure, deeply mysterious era of ancient history known simply as Dynasty Zero. And let me tell you, it is a time that absolutely defies every expectation we have of how history is supposed to look. For instance, have you ever heard of a ruler named King Finger Snail? Say what? I mean, seriously, take a second and really try to imagine a modern world leader, a president, a prime minister, a king, stepping up to a podium on live television and adopting a bizarre, surreal name like Finger Snail. It's literally impossible to picture, isn't it? Yet this is exactly the kind of jaw-dropping historical reality we're dealing with when we look at our sources for this era. We are entering a world that feels completely alien to our modern sensibilities. It's a place where the branding of absolute power took some, well, wildly unexpected turns. Okay, let's dive into this, because before all those famous, neatly numbered lineages of history, before Dynasty 1 and Dynasty 2 and the rest of the whole shebang, there existed this shadowy, foundational era. Historians simply dub it Dynasty Zero. It's a zero. It's quite literally a placeholder for the unknown. It represents a time when the very concept of a unified state or a traditional royal lineage was still just an idea forming in the dark. It is the prehistoric staging ground for civilization as we know it today. Which brings us to part 1, the Dynasty Zero mystery, entering the void. To wrap our heads around this era, we really have to understand our remarkably sparse source material, which relies strictly on 2 highly fragmented lists of rulers. We are literally entering a void here. The source data for this explainer doesn't hand us grand, pristine libraries or sweeping historical epics detailing heroic deeds in battle. Instead, the entire geographic layout of our data is defined by a fundamental contrast. On one side, we have Upper Egypt, which funnily enough is actually located in the south, and on the other side we have Lower Egypt, which is situated up in the north. This geographical divide is the absolute bedrock of our source material. We are essentially pitting the rulers of the Southern Kingdom directly against their northern contemporaries. It's 2 different landscapes, 2 different cultures, and 2 totally different lists of shadow kings. Let's start down south with part 2, Upper Egypt's animal rulers, the wild kings of the south. We are taking a deep dive into some of the most literal feral naming conventions in recorded human history. Get a load of these southern rulers: finger snail, fish, elephant, stork, bull, crocodile, scorpion eye, and scorpion 2. It is just unbelievable. I invite you to marvel at this for a moment. Just imagine the sheer level of confidence it takes to build a terrifying or majestic ancient brand around being a stork or a fish. And then, of course, you have the heavy hitters, right? The kings who wanted to project absolute, undeniable lethality, calling themselves crocodile or scorpion. And actually, they liked the name scorpion so much, they used it twice. These names give us this incredibly fascinating psychological window into a culture that was deeply, intimately intertwined with the raw, untamed power of the natural world around them. Now, what's really interesting here is the abrupt shift in the data. The Upper Egypt list doesn't just stop at feral animals. We also have rulers with entirely different naming conventions. For example, we have a ruler known simply by the single letter A. I mean, you go from a giant crocodile to just A. Then we see names like Irihor and Ka. And finally, we hit the renowned Narmer, who is also known as Menes. The stark contrast between those wild animal names and these much more abstract, almost modern-sounding designations is absolutely brilliant. It shows us an ancient kingdom in transition. They're actively experimenting with how a ruler should be perceived by the masses. Let's move to and see how this builds in part 3, Lower Egypt's enigmatic kings, the northern contemporaries. We absolutely cannot ignore the north. The roster up north is slightly different, yet equally fascinating. Take a look at this first batch of northern kings: Hejuhor, Nihor, Nineth, Hathor, Pu, Hisekio, and Kayu. Do you see the pattern emerging? Unlike that chaotic, awesome zoo of the south, Lower Egypt gives us very distinct, repetitive naming conventions. We see this recurring Hor element, Heju-Hor, Nai-Hor, Ha-Tor, and the Neith element in Nineth. This kind of structured repetition suggests a completely different approach to royal identity. It really hints at a society deeply focused on shared lineages, religious continuity, or institutional titles, rather than just relying on the raw individual power of a wild beast. And then we get to the second half of the Lower Egypt roster: Tiyu, Thesh, Neheb, Wasner, Mech, Double Falcon, and Wash. Okay, you really have to lean into the absurdity here. While most of these names are short and sharp, right near the end, some absolute genius of ancient political branding decided that being a regular falcon just wasn't going to cut it. No way. This ruler demanded to be known as Double Falcon. It is incredible, over-the-top branding. It's like the ultimate prehistoric upsell. You can just imagine the power plays happening in the north, these rulers trying to outmaneuver each other with increasingly impressive, layered titles. So, let's tie this all together in part 4, a divided ancient land, looking at the dynasty in numbers. We're going to bring these regional lists together for a quick comparative analysis. And this brilliantly illustrates the surreal nature of this entire era. We are basically pitting the absolute wildest name from the south, Fingersnail, directly against the wildest, most boastful name from the north, Double Falcon. It sounds like a matchup in some mythical sporting event, doesn't it? In this corner, the Fingersnail. But this was the actual reality of Dynasty Zero. You had two vastly different cultures, separated by a river, conjuring up entirely different ways to project their strength and authority to their people. Beyond just the names, let's look at the derived data. Let's actually count them up. When we look at the raw numbers provided in our source, we see that Upper Egypt gives us a list of exactly 12 distinct rulers. However, Lower Egypt slightly outpaces them, putting 14 names on the board. So 12 in the south, 14 in the north. It's a pretty subtle difference, sure, but think about what that means. That represents generations of human history, of reigns rising and falling, completely locked away in these two simple numbers. So the crucial point I want you to take away is this. These wild, surreal names and these simple counts of 12 and 14, this is literally all that remains. These are just fragmented lists of a forgotten era. There are no sprawling ruins dedicated to King Fingersnail. There are no grand, cowering statues of Double Falcon that we know of. These shadow kingdoms exist today merely as data points, faint whispers from a time just before civilization learned how to properly carve its memory into stone. Which brings us to the ultimate question I want to leave you with today. Between the raw, terrifying power of the crocodile and the calculated, highly boastful branding of the Double Falcon, what do these forgotten names actually tell us about human history? What does it say about our innate, deep-seated human desire to be remembered, and the extreme lengths the very earliest leaders went to in order to define themselves in such a dangerous, untamed world? It is an absolutely fascinating mystery to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time as we continue to decode the fascinating data of our world.